Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Hercule Mysteries. Tonight's story begins in the quietest hour of the night, when the world is asleep and truth feels far away. But just before dawn, one unexpected guest arrives, and in a mystery like this, the last person to enter the house may be the first reason someone won't leave it alive. So settle in, relax, and let's begin The Last Guest Before Dawn. Chapter 1. The House That Stayed Awake. There was something unnatural about a house that remained awake at 4 in the morning, not because it had lights on, many houses did if their owners were anxious or unwell, not because it held people inside, many houses did, on stormy nights when trains were delayed or roads were unsafe. No, Harridan Manor stayed awake in a different way. It stayed awake the way a guilty mind stayed awake. Not by choice, but by consequence. Outside, the wind slipped between tall winter-bare trees and made a soft whispering sound, like distant voices traveling across old stone. Rain did not fall in sheets, it fell politely, tapping the manor's tall windows as if asking permission. Inside, the warmth was carefully arranged. The lamps were shaded with cream linen, the carpets were thick enough to silence footsteps. The fireplace breathed quietly, red-orange embers glowing like the last coals of an evening that had refused to end. In the sitting room, tea had grown cold. A tray sat on a small table, porcelain cups rimmed in gold, a silver sugar tongue, a half-empty plate of biscuits. The air carried the soft scent of Earl Grey, beeswax polish, and a faint trace of cigar smoke that clung to velvet like memory. 7 guests had gathered that night at Harridan Manor. By midnight, most had wanted to leave. By 1, none had been able to. And now, at nearly dawn, they sat as if time had pressed them into the furniture. The host was Mr. Lionel Harridan, a man of 61 with neatly combed silver hair and a face that had once been handsome, but had been sharpened by worry and pride. He wore a dark dressing robe over his shirt, as though he had given up on appearances hours ago. Across from him sat his wife, Mrs. Cora Harridan, impeccably composed even at this hour, posture straight, hands folded neatly, as if she were still receiving visitors at 5 in the evening. She did not look tired. That alone made her dangerous. Beside the fireplace stood Dr. Malcolm Wren, a physician with calm grey eyes, sleeves rolled slightly, looking less like a guest and more like a man who had been called to prevent something. Near the bookshelf, pacing slowly like a caged thought, was Captain Hugh Ashford, retired Navy, thick shoulders, controlled anger, eyes that didn't trust anyone in the room. At the far side of the sitting room, resting in a high-backed chair with careful elegance, was Miss Beatrice Lorne, a widow with pearls around her neck and a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. And then there were 2 others who didn't quite belong. Mr. Silas Crowe, a solicitor, thin-lipped and cautious, holding his leather briefcase close as though it contained something that could explode. And Miss Edith Vale, the Harridan household companion and secretary, young, quiet, pale from worry, eyes darting between the host and the servant's door. The final person in the room, seated slightly apart as if by habit, was the detective. Not a police detective, not a man in uniform, but a man whose stillness could silence a room without raising his voice. His name was Etienne Marceau. He was Belgian by birth, tidy by nature, and notorious among certain circles for solving cases with calm logic rather than drama. He wore a neat suit, as though it was still early evening, not 4 in the morning. His hands rested gently on the handle of a slim cane, not because he needed it, but because it gave him rhythm, focus, and an excuse to pause. The room was quiet, not peaceful, quiet, because everyone in it was holding something back: fear, anger, guilt, secrets, lies, or some combination of them all. Captain Ashford broke the silence first. "This is absurd," he snapped, voice tight. "It's nearly dawn. Whatever Lionel thinks he's doing, it cannot go on." Lionel Harridan's eyes flicked up. "Captain, you may leave when the roads are safe." Ashford scoffed. "The roads were safe hours ago." Dr. Wren spoke carefully. "Hugh, please." Ashford turned on him. "Doctor, I respect your profession, but I do not accept being locked in a house like a child." Miss Beatrice Lorne smiled faintly. "Locked? Captain, don't be dramatic. If the doors were locked, we wouldn't hear the wind." Ashford's jaw clenched. Marceau watched them all with the calm interest of a man listening to a radio play. And in the gentle glow of the lamps, he noticed the details that mattered. A glass decanter on the shelf behind Lionel, untouched. The fireplace poker angled away from the stand, as if it had been moved and returned hastily, a faint smudge of damp mud on the Persian rug, one shoe print only, as though one person had stepped in from outside, then stopped. The hour sat heavily on everyone. Mrs. Cora Harridan finally spoke, her voice soft but commanding. "We should end this," she said. "Lionel, you've had your guests for long enough." Lionel looked at his wife. His eyes did not soften. It was subtle, but Marceau saw it. This marriage was not a partnership. It was a battlefield with manners. Lionel cleared his throat. "My guests will remain," he said, "until we have resolved the matter." Mr. Silas Crowe swallowed. "Mr. Harridan, I've already explained," Lionel snapped. "You've explained nothing. You have danced around it like a coward." Cora's eyes narrowed. Lionel ignored her. He leaned forward, voice roughened by exhaustion. "I invited you all," he said, "because someone among you has been stealing from me." "Silence!" Captain Ashford laughed sharply. "Stealing! At this hour!" Miss Beatrice Lorne's smile faded. "Lionel, this isn't appropriate." Lionel's voice rose. "My private papers, my personal documents, my will." The word will landed like a weight. Mr. Crowe's briefcase tightened in his grip. Edith Vale's breath caught. Dr. Wren stiffened. Marceau's eyes sharpened slightly. Now the house made sense. Money and inheritance. Two forces strong enough to keep polite people awake until dawn. Lionel continued. "I know someone here has read it," he said, "and someone here intends to use it against me." Mrs. Cora Harridan's lips tightened in a way that almost looked like a smile. Captain Ashford muttered, "Ridiculous." Miss Lorne whispered, "Lionel, everyone here is a friend." Lionel laughed bitterly. "Friends." Then Lionel turned his gaze toward Marceau. "And you," he said, "you are not a friend." Marceau nodded calmly. "No." Lionel leaned closer. "So, tell me, Mr. Marceau, have you worked out who it is yet?" Marceau replied in a tone gentle enough to soothe a nervous room. "I have worked out something more important." Lionel's eyes narrowed. "Which is?" Marceau's gaze moved across the room slowly, carefully. "That the theft is not the most dangerous thing happening tonight." A chill moved through the air. Dr. Wren spoke quietly. "What do you mean?" Marceau tilted his head. "There is a reason," he said, "that your guests did not leave earlier." Captain Ashford barked, "Yes, Lionel's madness." Marceau's eyes remained calm. "No," he said softly, "because the house did not want one person to leave." Silence grew thick as smoke. Edith Vale stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Marceau looked at her gently. "I am saying," he said, "that tonight is not a theft." He paused. "It is a waiting." "Captain," Ashford's voice turned hard. "Waiting for what?" Marceau turned toward the tall grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swung like a slow heartbeat. He said softly, "For the last guest, Chapter 2, a calm gathering. Nearly over." At 4:08 a.m., the sitting room had become unbearably warm, not because the fire burned too brightly, but because tension did. Lionel Harridan rose from his chair and paced toward the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. The glass was misted with condensation, blurring the outside world into pale smudges. The garden beyond was dark, washed in rain. The tall hedges looked like walls. Lionel stared out as if expecting someone, or fearing them. Mrs. Cora Harridan watched him. Her expression was composed, but Marceau noticed something in her hands. She rubbed her thumb against her wedding ring again and again. Not nervousness, impatience. The kind of impatience that belonged to someone who knew the ending already. Dr. Wren moved toward the tea tray and poured a cup, though his hand shook slightly. He didn't drink it. He only held it for warmth. Miss Beatrice Lorne spoke softly, trying to keep civility alive. "Lionel," she said, "if this is about the will, we can discuss it in the morning." Lionel turned sharply. "No!" His voice was too quick, too final. Marceau watched Lionel more closely now. Fear was hidden in Lionel's eyes, and fear, Marceau knew, only existed when a person believed someone else held power. Captain Ashford stepped toward Lionel. "Open the doors," he demanded. If you want to accuse us, but I will not remain in this house like a hostage. Lionel's mouth twisted. Hostage? He laughed softly, then looked at the captain. You've held men hostage on ships, Captain. Don't pretend you're innocent of control. Ashford's face reddened. That's not the same, and you know it, Edith Vale whispered, almost to herself. It's nearly time. Everyone froze. Cora Harridan's gaze snapped toward Edith. What did you say? Cora asked softly. Edith flinched. Nothing. I didn't. Marceau's voice interrupted gently. Miss Vale, he said, your honesty is trembling. Edith's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Dr. Wren frowned. Edith, what's happening? Edith's lips shook. She looked at Lionel. Then, in a whisper, she said, He told me someone would come. Silence. Lionel's head lifted slowly. He stared at Edith with rage. Cora's voice was a soft blade. Lionel, what have you done? Lionel snapped. I have done what is necessary, Captain Ashford growled. What does that mean? Lionel turned from them all, then unexpectedly spoke as if addressing himself. I could not live, he said, with betrayal in my own house, Miss Lorne whispered. Betrayal? Lionel's hands trembled now. My brother's death, he said suddenly. 5 years ago, the carriage accident. It was not an accident. A cold ripple spread through the sitting room. Mr. Crow's face went pale. Dr. Wren stiffened. Cora Harridan's eyes narrowed like a hunter seeing prey. Marceau held still. Because now the story had revealed its true skeleton, Lionel continued, voice cracking. I learned the truth last month, he said, and I changed my will. Now it all clicked. Inheritance, theft, will, a brother dead, a secret discovered, and a house that refused to sleep. Captain Ashford took a slow step backward. Lionel, he said carefully, what truth? Lionel turned. His eyes were wet, but the fear remained. He pointed a trembling finger at the group. One of you, he said, killed him. The room exploded into protest. Miss Lorne gasped. Lionel, don't, Crow shouted. This is madness, Ashford snarled. Careful with your accusations. Cora Harridan laughed once, quiet, amused. You finally grew a spine, she murmured. Lionel ignored her. His gaze moved back to the clock again. 4:10 a.m. Marceau's eyes followed. The clock mattered. The time mattered. At 4:11 a.m. the fire popped loudly. At 4:12 a.m. the doorbell rang, not a frantic ringing, one single chime, polite, patient, like rain. Every head turned. Even Lionel, who had been staring toward the clock, flinched as if struck. Edith Vale whispered, No. Cora Harridan's face went still. Captain Ashford's hand moved toward his pocket instinctively, as if seeking a weapon. Dr. Wren whispered, Who would come at this hour? Marceau stood. He didn't rush. He simply rose like a man honoring a tradition. The last guest, he said softly. Lionel's voice cracked. Don't let them in. But Cora spoke calmly, far too calmly. They're already here, she said. A faint creak came from the hallway outside the sitting room. Footsteps, slow, measured, not a servant, not hurried. A person entering with permission or with certainty. Then the sitting room door opened, and the last guest appeared. Chapter 3. The doorbell at 4:12 a.m. For a moment the room did not breathe. The kind of silence that fell over Harridan Manor at that precise second was not the ordinary quiet of late night. It was a silence that carried weight, as if the house itself had stopped to listen. The sitting room door stood open. In its frame, partially lit by the dim corridor lamp, stood a man. He was not young, yet not old enough to move like a relic, perhaps late 30s, early 40s. He wore a dark coat with rain beading at the shoulders, and his gloves were folded neatly in one hand. There was nothing dramatic about his appearance. No theatrical hat, no obvious weapon, no villain's grin, and yet he looked like someone who belonged in the house far more than a guest should. His eyes swept the room once, slowly, calmly. Then, with a faint nod that almost resembled courtesy, he spoke. Good morning, he said. His voice was smooth, too smooth for the hour. Captain Ashford stood instantly, his chair scraping the floor. Who the devil are you? He demanded. The man's mouth curved into a polite half-smile. My apologies, he said. I am aware the hour is unusual. Mrs. Cora Harridan did not stand. She did not even flinch. She only looked at him with the cold focus of a woman seeing something she had expected. "Mr. Vale," she said quietly. The man inclined his head. "Yes, Mrs. Harridan." Edith Vale, standing near the wall, turned the color of milk. Dr. Wren frowned sharply. "Vale?" Edith's lips trembled. "That's my brother," she whispered. Every eye turned. Lionel Harridan, who had been frozen near the fireplace, suddenly staggered a step backward as if the man's name had pushed him physically. "No," Lionel whispered. "No, this is not." Mr. Vale stepped inside, closing the sitting-room door behind him as gently as one would close a bedroom door to avoid waking a child. That gesture alone chilled Etienne Marceau. Because guilty people rushed, predators did not. Mr. Vale glanced toward Lionel, and his smile softened into something that looked almost sympathetic. "Lionel," he said, "you look unwell." Lionel's face twisted. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh," Vale replied softly, "but you invited me." The sitting room seemed to shrink. Captain Ashford stepped between Lionel and Vale like an instinctive shield. "Now, listen here," Ashford barked. "If you are here to threaten anyone—" Vale did not even look at Ashford. He removed his coat calmly and placed it over a chair as if he were settling in for supper. Then he replied, without emotion, "I am not here to threaten." He paused. "I am here to collect." That word struck like a bell. Mr. Silas Crowe clutched at his briefcase harder. Miss Beatrice Lorne's pearls trembled slightly as her throat tightened. Dr. Wren took a slow breath, then spoke carefully. "Collect what?" Vale looked toward the fireplace. His gaze was sharp, measuring. "A debt," he said. Lionel Harridan's voice broke. "What debt?" Vale's eyes finally shifted toward Lionel, soft, patient. "The debt of silence," he murmured. A cold ripple moved through the room, and in that ripple Etienne Marceau understood something vital. This man was not merely the last guest. He was the reason the night could not end. The house's memory veil took one step forward, then another. The room unconsciously adjusted to his movement, as if everyone were making space not only for his body, but for his importance. He stopped near the tea table and looked at the cold cups. "How kind," he said. "You kept tea." Nobody answered. He picked up a spoon, a small, ordinary spoon, turned it between his fingers like someone appreciating a coin, then set it down. A meaningless act, yet the room grew tighter. Because when predators touch ordinary objects, those objects begin to feel like weapons. Vale looked at Edith, his sister. "Edith," he said gently, "you look frightened." Edith's lips trembled. This wasn't supposed to—" Vale raised a finger, like a teacher correcting a child. "Hush," he said. "You did well. You told them the time. You followed instructions." Edith's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Cora Harridan finally spoke again. "You're here early," she said. Vale turned to her almost warmly. "Time matters," he replied. "You of all people know that." Captain Ashford snapped. "Enough riddles. What do you want?" Vale finally acknowledged Ashford's existence with a slow glance. He smiled faintly. "I want the truth," Vale said. Then he added softly, "And I want the man who stole it from me." Lionel's face turned grey. Vale continued, pacing slowly in front of the fireplace like a judge preparing a sentence. 5 years ago, Vale said calmly, a carriage accident occurred. Dr. Wren stiffened. "Lionel's brother." Vale smiled. "Yes, the noble tragedy, the unfortunate turn, the grief that made everyone sigh politely and move on." He turned toward Lionel. "It was not an accident, was it?" Lionel whispered. "Stop!" Vale's voice sharpened. "Stop! No!" Then he looked at the others. "You were all there," he said. "One way or another." Miss Lorne gasped. "That's not true." Vale tilted his head, almost amused. "Miss Lorne," he said, "your pearls are shaking. Either you are cold or you remember." Miss Lorne's mouth opened, closed. Mr. Crowe swallowed. "This is inappropriate." Vale raised a hand gently. "Mr. Crowe, you are a solicitor. Inappropriate is how your profession survives." Crowe's face tightened. Vale continued, calm as a radio narrator. "Lionel Harridan's brother died, and something was gained." He paused. "The estate, Mrs. Cora Harridan's eyes narrowed. Captain Ashford growled. "Where are you going with this?" Vale looked at the clock. 4:14 a.m. "The man who died knew something," Vale said, "and that something was expensive." Silence. Then Vale did the most unsettling thing so far. He smiled like a man enjoying a quiet song. "And tonight," he said softly, "someone here tried to change the will." Lionel snapped. "No!" Vale's eyes flicked to Lionel. "Ah," he murmured, "so it is true." Cora Harridan laughed once, cold. "Lionel," she whispered, "you idiot." Lionel's hands trembled. "I changed nothing," Lionel lied. Etienne Marceau noticed the lie instantly because Lionel's voice rose at the end. Liars often rise. Truth stays level. Vale walked to the bookshelf, picked up a small object and held it up. A key, not a house key, a cabinet key. "I found this," Vale said, "in the corridor." Dr. Wren's eyes widened slightly. The study, the will. "Cabinet." Vale looked at Crow. "And I found this too," he said, tapping Crow's briefcase gently with his knuckle. Crow flinched. Captain Ashford snapped, "How dare you touch—" Vale's smile faded. Then the air changed. It was subtle but sudden, like a warm lamp being switched off. Vale's voice became colder. "I am not here to be dared," he said softly. He stepped back and said, "Open it," Crow whispered. "I cannot—" Vale looked at him like a blade. "Open it," he repeated. Inspector-level authority. But Vale was not an inspector. He was something worse, a man who controlled fear. Captain Ashford moved forward. Vale lifted his hand gently, and Ashford froze. Not because Vale was stronger, because the room was suddenly certain Vale could destroy them. Vale spoke again without raising his voice. "Inside that briefcase," he said, "is the legal revision Lionel Harridan signed 2 nights ago." Lionel's head jerked. "You stole it?" Vale smiled. "No," he said. "I retrieved it." Crow's hands shook as he slowly opened the briefcase. Inside were papers, sealed, signed, Lionel's signature unmistakable. Cora leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming like a predator. "You did change it," she whispered. Lionel stammered. I had to—" Cora smiled. "Then you truly are a fool." Vale took the top page and read calmly. Then he looked up. "And here is why I came before dawn," he said. He pointed at a paragraph. "It states," Vale murmured, "that if Lionel Harridan dies, suddenly, unexpectedly, before the will is witnessed officially," he paused, "the estate reverts to the previous arrangements." Silence. Captain Ashford's voice went hoarse. "You're saying someone wanted him to die tonight?" Vale nodded softly. "Yes." Then he looked at Lionel. "And perhaps," Vale added, "someone planned it." Lionel's eyes widened, terrified. "Who?" Lionel whispered. Vale's gaze moved slowly across the room. "One of you," he said. Then he smiled. "And I suspect the killer is already tired." The first crack, Dr. Wren stepped forward. "This is madness," he said. "We should call the police." Vale turned his head slightly, smiling again. "The police," he repeated as if tasting the word. Then he said something that made the room go colder than any winter. "You already did," Vale whispered. Captain Ashford snarled. "What?" Vale pointed subtly toward the corridor. A faint sound was heard, distant behind the thick walls, not footsteps, not wind, a faint engine, a vehicle outside. And then the muffled clink of gates. Lionel Harridan stared. "You called them," Lionel whispered. Vale's smile widened. "No," he said. He tilted his head toward Mrs. Cora Harridan. "She did." Cora's expression did not change, but her eyes gleamed. "Yes," she said softly. "I did." Lionel's face shattered with betrayal. "Cora, why—" Cora's voice became sweet. "Because," she said, "if anyone is going to control the story of this house—" She leaned forward slightly. "It will be me." Edith Vale started crying. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I didn't—" Vale's voice softened briefly. "Edith," he said, "this is not about what you wanted." Then his eyes sharpened again. "This is about what we're owed." Etienne Marceau, silent until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Vale," he said softly. Vale turned toward him. "Yes?" Etienne's voice was calm. "You are very comfortable in this house," he observed. Vale smiled faintly. "I have visited before." Etienne nodded. "And yet," Etienne said gently, "you entered at 4:12 a.m. exactly." Vale's smile tightened. "What of it?" Etienne continued softly. "That is not an accident." Vale's gaze sharpened. "And why?" Etienne added. "Did you ring the bell only once?" A pause. Vale did not answer immediately, and in that pause, Etienne Marceau felt something click, a detail, a fatal detail. This man was not simply the last guest, he was a signal, a trigger, perhaps even the final piece of a plan already set in motion. Etienne looked at Lionel. "Mr. Harridan," Etienne said softly, "have you eaten anything tonight?" Lionel blinked. "What?" Etienne repeated gently. "Have you eaten?" Lionel frowned. "Yes, earlier. Soup." Dr. Wren stiffened. "What kind of soup?" Etienne asked. Lionel whispered. "Mushroom." Dr. Wren's face turned sharp. "Who served it?" Lionel hesitated. "Edith," he said. Edith gasped. "I didn't," Vale snapped. "Edith did what she was told." The room exploded with fear. Dr. Wren grabbed Lionel's wrist, checking pulse. Lionel's pulse raced. His skin looked slightly damp, his lips pale. Dr. Wren whispered harshly, "Lionel's being poisoned." Silence. Cora stood abruptly. "No," she whispered. Vale's calm face finally cracked for the first time, just a fraction. Lionel whispered in panic, "You did this?" Cora's eyes burned. "I didn't," Captain Ashford shouted. "Who did?" Etienne Marceau's eyes moved to Vale. Vale did not look shocked. He looked satisfied. Like a man arriving at the exact second he knew a watch would stop, Vale spoke softly. "The dawn is coming," he said, "and so is death." Chapter 4. The guest nobody invited police lanterns appeared in the driveway like distant fireflies, small points of light moving through rain mist. Yet inside Harridan Manor, no one felt rescued. Because the danger was not outside the gates, it was already seated in the sitting room. Lionel Harridan's knees buckled again. Dr. Malcolm Wren tightened his grip around Lionel's forearm and guided him back into the nearest chair. "Easy," Dr. Wren murmured. "Breathe slowly." Lionel tried, but his breathing was shallow, frantic, like a man swallowing air that refused to help him. His skin had taken on a faint grey tone, and the dampness around his hairline was not from heat, but from the body fighting something it did not understand. Poison did not always announce itself with drama. Often it arrived with subtlety and certainty. Miss Beatrice Lorne stood by the mantelpiece, one hand pressed against her throat, as though holding her heart in place. Captain Hugh Ashford hovered near Lionel like a soldier guarding a sinking ship. Silas Crowe sat stiffly, his briefcase now open, papers spilled like the guts of a secret. Edith Vale trembled near the wall, eyes wide and wet. Mrs. Cora Harridan, strangely, looked the calmest, and Mr. Vale, the last guest before dawn. He stood with the relaxed confidence of a man who had arrived exactly on time for a performance he himself had arranged. Etienne Marceau watched him, not with anger, not with fear, with attention. Because attention, Marceau believed, was the most powerful form of suspicion. Vale moved slowly toward the fireplace. He did not rush to Lionel. He did not ask, "Are you well?" He did not pretend to be shocked. Instead, he said softly, as if commenting on the weather, "So, it has begun." That single sentence turned the room colder than the rain outside. Captain Ashford snapped instantly, stepping forward. "You!" Ashford barked. "You know what's happening." Vale turned his head just slightly and smiled at the captain, not warmly, politely. "Captain," he said, "try not to shout. It ruins the atmosphere." Ashford's fists clenched. "Ruins the atmosphere," Ashford repeated, voice rising. "A man is dying." Vale's smile remained. "Yes," he replied calmly. "That tends to ruin things." Lionel's voice cracked weakly. "Who are you?" he whispered. Vale leaned toward him a fraction. "A reminder," Vale said. "And in some ways, a consequence." Dr. Wren looked up sharply. "Enough!" the doctor snapped. "Inspector will be here any moment. I suggest you choose your words carefully." Vale nodded. Of course. Then, as if he had suddenly remembered manners, Vale looked around the room and said, I suppose I should clarify something. Nobody spoke. Vale continued, I did not ring the bell because I was invited. Silence tightened. Cora Harridan's eyes narrowed. Vale smiled faintly. I rang the bell, he said, because I was expected. The guest book. He walked to the side table near the corridor door, the one holding a brass guest book and a fountain pen that had been untouched since midnight. Vale opened it calmly, turned the pages, then stopped. His gloved finger tapped the paper softly. There, he said. Captain Ashford marched over and snatched the guest book from the table. What am I meant to see? He demanded. Vale simply pointed. Ashford stared, then froze. On the page, neatly written in dark ink, was a name, Mr. Elias Vale. 4:12 a.m. The room went dead quiet. Because this was not handwriting from tonight, it did not match any of the guest's scribbles earlier. It looked deliberate, prepared. Miss Lorne gasped. No, that's impossible, Crow whispered. That ink is dry. It's been there longer. Edith Vale stared at the guest book as if it were accusing her. It wasn't me, she whispered. I didn't write it. Vale smiled faintly. No, he said softly, you didn't. Then he looked directly at Mrs. Cora Harridan. But someone did. Cora Harridan's expression did not change, but her eyes hardened like ice forming. You're playing games, she said. Vale replied smoothly. No, Mrs. Harridan. He paused. Tonight, your house is playing games. Etienne stepped forward calmly. What exactly are you implying, Mr. Vale? He asked. Vale turned toward Marceau and studied him, as if measuring the size of a blade. He smiled slightly. You're the detective, Vale said softly. You tell me, Marceau nodded. Very well. He walked to the guest book and examined the ink. Then he leaned in slightly, not to smell it like melodrama, but to understand it. This was written earlier, Marceau said. How do you know? Captain Ashford demanded. Marceau replied calmly. Because the ink has settled into the fibers. Fresh ink looks wet. This looks absorbed. It was written at least 1 hour ago. Silence. Marceau continued. So, he said gently, someone knew you were coming. Vale's smile grew. Yes, and then he added softly, and someone wanted everyone to know it. The hidden invitation outside, the sound of police footsteps grew louder. Doors opened in the corridor, voices, low, official, but no one moved. Yet, because before Law arrived, the truth had already entered. Vale returned to the tea table and casually lifted the mushroom soup bowl, now empty, placed on a side tray earlier. He turned it slightly, and suddenly Marceau noticed something that made his mind sharpen, a faint powdery residue on the bowl's rim, almost invisible, but present. Vale set the bowl down gently. I assume, Vale said softly, that Lionel has informed you about the will. Miss Lorne snapped, Stop talking! Vale looked at her as one might look at a barking dog. Miss Lorne, he said, I have listened politely to far worse people than you. Miss Lorne's face went pale, then Vale turned toward Crow. And you, Mr. Crow, Vale murmured, are holding the will documents like a holy scripture. Crow's voice shook. I'm a solicitor. It's my duty. Vale smiled. Duty, he repeated. Such a flexible word. Marceau watched the interaction with calm precision. This wasn't random bullying. Vale was doing something, a performance with purpose, a prosecutor laying down pressure to force cracks. Then Vale looked toward Lionel again. Lionel, he said softly, did you truly believe changing a will would protect you? Lionel whispered, barely able to speak. I changed it to punish. Vale nodded. And that is why, Vale said, you invited me. Lionel's head jerked. No, I didn't. Vale leaned in closer, voice silky. You did, he said. Not with a letter, not with ink. He paused. You invited me with guilt. The room shuddered. Then Vale did something strange. He reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Not the will envelope. Another. He placed it on the table. Marceau's eyes narrowed. Vale slid it forward toward Captain Ashford. Open it, Vale said. Ashford hesitated, then ripped it open. Inside was a telegram slip. The words were brief but sharp like knives. Arriving. 4:12 am stopped last guest before dawn. Stop, keep them inside, stop. Ashford stared. His voice went hoarse. Who sent this? Vale smiled. I did, he said. Silence then. What? Miss Lorne gasped. Vale's eyes glinted. Yes, he said softly. I sent it to the manor. And who received it? Ashford snapped. Vale turned toward Edith. Edith burst into tears instantly. I didn't know what to do, she cried. Mrs. Harridan told me to keep it quiet. She said it was necessary. Cora Harridan's voice snapped like a whip. Edith, you useless girl. Marceau raised a calm hand. Madam, he said gently, please don't waste time blaming the frightened. Cora's eyes burned. You're protecting her, she hissed. Marceau replied simply, No. Then his eyes sharpened. I'm watching you. Inspector arrives. The sitting room door opened again. This time the figure in the doorway was not subtle. Inspector Gareth Holloway entered like a storm wrapped in uniform. He was tall, heavy-shouldered, rain still clinging to his coat, lantern held in one hand. 2 constables followed behind him. Holloway's eyes swept the room. He immediately saw Lionel's condition. What the devil? He muttered. Dr. Wren stood. Inspector, Lionel's been poisoned. Holloway's face darkened instantly. Poisoned, he repeated slowly. Then his gaze locked on Vale. And who in God's name are you? Vale bowed slightly, almost charming. Elias Vale, he said. A guest? Holloway barked a laugh. At 4 a.m? Vale's voice remained calm. Yes. Holloway's eyes moved to the guest book on the table and the telegram slip. He read quickly. Then his face hardened. He looked at Marceau. You? Holloway said. I know you. Etienne Marceau. Marceau nodded politely. Holloway grunted. So it's that kind of night? He turned to his constables. Lock this house down, he ordered. No one leaves, Captain Ashford muttered. Finally, Holloway turned sharply. And you, Captain, will keep your mouth shut unless asked. Ashford clenched his jaw but obeyed. Holloway stepped forward, voice hard. Now, who wants to confess before I make the room uncomfortable? Vale smiled faintly. It's already uncomfortable, he murmured. Holloway snapped. You'll speak when I ask you. Vale's smile didn't fade. He only replied softly. You can ask. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Marceau saw it clearly now. Holloway wasn't the only authority in the room. Vale was, not by law, by fear. In the wrong enemy, Inspector Holloway moved toward Lionel. Dr. Wren spoke quietly. If he collapses fully, he may not recover. I need him at hospital. Holloway nodded once. We'll get the carriage. Then he looked at Marceau. You think it's attempted murder? He asked. Marceau replied softly. No. Holloway blinked. No. Marceau's eyes went to the guest book again, then to the telegram, then to Vale's calm face. I think, Marceau said gently, this is not an attempt. He paused. This is a schedule. A chill hit the room. Holloway stared at Vale. You scheduled a poison? Vale answered calmly. I scheduled a meeting. Holloway snarled. With death? Vale's voice remained smooth. Death is often punctual, he murmured. Cora Harridan suddenly spoke. For once, she said softly, I agree with him. Lionel's head snapped toward her weakly. Cora, he whispered. Cora leaned forward, eyes cold. You changed your will, she said. You planned to throw me out like rubbish, Lionel whispered. You killed my brother? Cora laughed quietly. Your brother died because he was stupid, she said. The room froze. Even Holloway stiffened. Dr. Wren whispered, My God. Marceau's eyes sharpened. That wasn't just anger. That was confession flirting with arrogance. Holloway barked, Mrs. Harridan, watch your mouth. Cora turned her head slowly. You think I'm afraid of your uniform? She asked. Then she smiled. You should be afraid of my husband's secrets. Lionel coughed violently. Vale watched all of it with calm satisfaction. And Marceau realized the most frightening truth of the night. Vale didn't come to kill Lionel. Vale came to make Lionel speak. right before he couldn't, because dying men confess, and confession was the true prize. Chapter 4, Part 2. The guest, nobody invited, Lionel Harridan, coughed again, harder this time. The sound was ugly, wet, hollow. It didn't sound like a simple illness. It sounded like the body protesting something foreign inside it, something that didn't belong. Dr. Malcolm Wren leaned close, checking Lionel's pulse again with two steady fingers. His face hardened. "This isn't just weakness," he murmured. "His heart rhythm is disturbed." Inspector Gareth Holloway stepped closer, lantern lifting Lionel's face into harsh truth. "You swallowed something," Holloway said bluntly. Lionel's eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak, failed. Cora Harridan watched Lionel as though she were watching a man whose funeral she had already planned. Captain Ashford's voice was low, furious. "If he dies before telling us who poisoned him, we're finished," Miss Beatrice Lorne whispered. "Finished?" Ashford snapped. "We're all trapped in here, aren't we? And the one man who invited the police is barely breathing. Use your head." Silas Crowe clutched his briefcase tighter, as if a will could protect him from guilt. Edith Vale sobbed quietly, and Elias Vale, the last guest, looked almost peaceful, as though the slow collapse of Lionel Harridan was not tragedy to him, but timing. Etienne Marceau, calm as ever, stepped closer to Lionel and spoke gently. "Mr. Harridan," he said softly, "listen carefully." Lionel's eyes, barely open, moved toward him. Marceau continued, voice low enough to feel private, yet clear enough to carry like radio narration. "You do not have much time," he said. "Not because you will die immediately, but because your mind will become fog." Lionel blinked weakly. Marceau asked, "Who served you the soup?" Lionel's lips trembled. He whispered, "Edith." Edith cried, "No, I didn't poison. I only served. I swear." Marceau raised a hand gently. "Edith," he said, "we are not accusing the tray. We are looking for the hand that prepared it." Inspector Holloway pointed sharply. "Kitchen staff. Where's the cook?" A constable replied, "Cook's asleep downstairs. We can bring her." Holloway barked, "Bring her now!" The constable hurried out. Marceau's eyes returned to the room. The clue was not only who served it, it was why. Lionel ate it all. He turned to Lionel again. "Lionel," Marceau asked softly, "did you insist on soup tonight, or did someone insist you take it?" Lionel's breathing trembled. He whispered, "Cora." The room snapped into silence. Cora Harridan smiled faintly, as if amused by the sheer audacity of being blamed. "My husband is delirious," she said. Captain Ashford moved toward her. "Is he?" Cora's voice became sharper. "Captain, don't start pretending you're a hero now. We both know how you earn your bravery." Ashford stiffened. Marceau noticed the shift instantly. Cora had struck where it hurt, meaning she knew Ashford too well, meaning she had power over him. Holloway's voice cut through the tension. "Mrs. Harridan," he said, "did you instruct Edith to serve Lionel anything tonight?" Cora lifted her chin. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I told her to feed my husband because he refuses to eat when he's nervous." Holloway narrowed his eyes. "And why would he be nervous?" Cora's smile deepened. "Because," she said softly, "he was planning to ruin lives." Miss Beatrice Lorne gasped. "Cora!" Cora turned her head slowly toward the widow. "Beatrice," she said, "please, your shock is exhausting." Marceau watched Cora carefully now. Some people panicked when accused. Others became offended. Cora became entertained. She spoke like a woman who believed she was untouchable. That confidence came only from two things: innocence or an exit plan. And Marceau was starting to suspect it was not innocence. The last guest's true purpose. Vale moved closer to Lionel's chair. He did not kneel, did not help. He leaned just enough to speak. "Lionel," Vale said softly, "you see, this is why I came before dawn." Lionel's eyes widened with fear. Vale continued, "You wanted to speak in the morning. You wanted to do this slowly, politely, like a gentleman," he smiled. "But gentlemen die with secrets." Holloway snapped, "Back away from him." Vale looked at the inspector. "No," he said calmly. The room went colder. It was a small word, but it was spoken with the certainty of someone used to obedience. Holloway stepped forward, anger rising. "You think you're above the law?" Vale replied gently. "I think the law arrives late." Then he looked back at Lionel. "You invited me, Lionel," Vale said softly. "Not because you wanted help," he paused, "but because you wanted a witness." Lionel's lips trembled. Dr. Wren looked up sharply. "Witness to what?" Silence. Marceau stepped forward slightly. "Lionel changed his will," Marceau said quietly, "and now he fears he will not live long enough to finalize it." Crow swallowed hard. "That's possible," he whispered. Cora's eyes flashed. "Stop speaking for him." Marceau didn't look at her. "He fears," Marceau continued, "that someone in this room will ensure that new will never becomes official." Holloway stared around the room. "Which means," he muttered, "one of you planned his death before dawn." Vale smiled faintly. "Exactly," he murmured. Captain Ashford's jaw clenched. "So this was all a trap," he said. "This whole evening." Vale nodded once. "A trap," he agreed. Then he added softly, "for truth." The cook arrives, and the soup's secret footsteps rushed in the corridor. The cook was brought in, Mrs. Elsie Bram, stout, sleepy-eyed, hair pinned hastily. She looked like a woman pulled out of dreams into danger. "What is this?" she cried. "What's happening?" Holloway snapped. "Did you make the soup Lionel Harridan ate tonight?" Mrs. Bram blinked rapidly. "Yes," she said. "Mushroom soup, same as always." Holloway growled. "Who else went into the kitchen?" Mrs. Bram frowned, thinking. Then she said, slowly, "Mrs. Harridan came in earlier, around midnight." Cora's eyes sharpened. "To check the menu." Mrs. Bram hesitated. "I don't think it was about menu," she whispered. Silence. Cora turned her head slowly. "Explain," she said. Mrs. Bram swallowed. "She asked me if the pantry still had the old dried herbs," she said. "She said she needed them for Lionel's stomach." Dr. Wren stiffened. "Which herbs?" he asked sharply. Mrs. Bram whispered, "Foxglove." The room turned to ice. Even Captain Ashford's posture faltered. Marceau's eyes narrowed. Foxglove, a pretty word for a pretty poison. Digitalis. The slow poison Dr. Wren had suspected. Holloway snapped. "Why would foxglove be in the pantry?" Mrs. Bram wrung her hands. "Old house," she whispered. "Old habits. We used it in tiny amounts. Long ago, not now, never now." Dr. Wren stood abruptly, voice sharp as steel. "Foxglove can kill," he said. Cora's face remained composed. "Many things can kill," she replied softly. Holloway's voice rose. "Did you add it to his soup, madam?" Cora looked at him with disdain. "Inspector," she said, "if I wanted my husband dead, he would not be coughing politely in a chair." The arrogance in her voice was almost artistic. Marceau watched her. The statement was telling. If I wanted him dead, he would be dead already. That wasn't denial. That was pride. Lionel coughed again, trembling. He whispered, "Cora, you're the poison." Cora's eyes flashed with cruelty. "Lionel," she whispered, "you're the disease." The fatal realization. Marceau stepped closer to the soup tray and studied it carefully. An empty bowl, a spoon, a faint residue. He asked Mrs. Bram calmly, "Did anyone bring the soup upstairs besides Edith?" Mrs. Bram nodded. "Yes," she said, "Mr. Vale." Silence slammed down. Edith turned sharply. "No, no, he didn't," Mrs. Bram insisted, trembling. "He came into kitchen," she said. "He said Mr. Harridan asked. He carried it himself." Vale smiled faintly. "Yes," he admitted. "I did." Holloway stared at him. "So you handled the soup," Holloway growled. "And Lionel is poisoned." Vale raised his hands slightly. "I handled a tray," he replied. "That doesn't make me a murderer." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Then why do it?" Vale answered calmly. "Because I wanted Lionel awake long enough to speak." Dr. Wren's eyes widened. Marceau's mind locked into the shape of the truth. Vale didn't poison Lionel. Vale wanted Lionel alive. But he wanted him pressured, terrified, forced into confession. So who poisoned Lionel? Cora, maybe. But Marceau's instincts whispered something else. The poison was not added in the kitchen. It was added later, somewhere private, somewhere only one person had access. Marceau turned and glanced toward Edith again. Edith's sleeves were slightly damp, not from tears, from washing hands, scrubbing, removing scent, removing evidence. Marceau walked slowly toward Edith and spoke gently. "Edith," he said, "may I see your hands?" Edith froze. "No," she whispered. That single word, small, frightened, was louder than any confession. Holloway stepped forward. "Show him!" The inspector barked. Edith shook her head violently. "I didn't mean it," she sobbed. Cora's eyes widened for the first time. "Edith," she whispered. Vale's smile faded slightly. Marceau's voice remained calm. "What did you do, Edith?" he asked softly. Edith collapsed into sobs. "I only wanted it to stop," she whispered. "All of it. The shouting. I did the secrets." Holloway grabbed her arm. "You poisoned him?" Holloway demanded. Edith cried. "Not like that. Not to kill. I only put a little—" Dr. Wren stepped forward, horrified. "A little is enough," he hissed. Edith whispered, shaking. "Mrs. Harridan gave me the herb and told me it would only make him sleep. So the morning would come, and everyone would go." Cora's face turned pale. "Liar," she whispered. Edith looked up, eyes shattered. "You told me to," she cried. "You said you'd protect me." And in that moment, Harridan Manor finally showed its true face. Not a murder house, a manipulation house, a house where the powerful used the weak like tools. End of chapter 4. The room stood on the edge of collapse. Lionel's breathing was shallow. Edith was sobbing. Cora was finally losing control. Vale was watching like a man who had just won the first round. And Marceau felt the story beginning to sharpen into its real form. Because now they knew Lionel was poisoned. Edith delivered it under instruction. Cora may have orchestrated it. Vale arrived exactly at 4:12 a.m. For a reason. The will is the real battlefield, but who truly wanted Lionel dead before dawn? That answer would come next. Chapter 5. The Strange Familiarity. Start. The dawn did not arrive suddenly. It arrived the way truth arrived, slowly, reluctantly, and without mercy. Outside, the rain softened into a thin mist. The sky at the horizon held the faintest grey line, like a blade just beginning to show itself. Inside Harridan Manor, the night was still very much alive. Inspector Holloway ordered a constable to escort Edith to a side room under guard. Edith did not resist. She walked like a ghost, eyes red, arms folded over her chest as though trying to hold herself together. As she passed Vale, she whispered, "I didn't want to." Vale didn't even look at her. He only murmured, "Wanting is irrelevant." Marceau watched Vale closely. This man's coldness was not anger. It was discipline. A man trained to detach, trained to use people. Holloway turned to Cora. "Mrs. Harridan," he said, "you will come with me." Cora lifted her chin. "For what?" she asked. "For attempted murder," Holloway said. Cora smiled faintly. "You cannot prove I handed her anything," she replied. Marceau stepped forward calmly. "No," he said softly. Cora's eyes snapped to him. "But I can prove," Marceau continued, "that your house has a pattern." Cora's smile tightened. "What pattern?" she asked. Marceau replied, "A pattern of choosing weak hands for strong crimes." Captain Ashford muttered, "What does that mean?" Marceau turned slightly. "It means," he said, "the person who planned tonight did not want blood on their own fingers." He paused. "So they chose Edith," Dr. Wren added sharply, "and they were wrong because Edith has a conscience." Silence. Cora's eyes hardened. Vale's gaze stayed calm. Lionel coughed again, weakly. Then Lionel whispered something that froze everyone. "He's back." Marceau leaned closer. "Who, Lionel?" he asked. Lionel's lips trembled. "My brother," Lionel whispered. "He's back." Vale's eyes glinted. Marceau's stomach tightened. Now the twist was forming. Because Lionel's brother was dead. Unless he wasn't, or unless someone in the house was pretending. Marceau looked toward Vale. Vale met his gaze. And for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, Vale's calm mask revealed something underneath. Not fear, not guilt, familiarity. As if he had heard Lionel say this before. As if it was part of the plan. Chapter 5. The Strange Familiarity. The first hint of dawn did not bring comfort. It brought exposure. Outside, the rain had softened into a grey mist that clung to the manor grounds like a secret refusing to leave. The sky at the horizon had begun to lighten, but only barely, as if even the sun hesitated to witness what Harrowden Manor had done in the dark. Inside, the sitting-room air felt thick, not warm, not calm, thick like velvet soaked in fear. Lionel Harrowden lay slumped in his chair. Dr. Malcolm Wren had positioned him with professional care, tilting his chin upward to open his airway, loosening his collar, checking the pulse again and again with the impatience of a man fighting against time. Inspector Gareth Holloway paced near the doorway, barking quiet orders to constables. Search this room, seal the corridor, watch the kitchen, secure the driveway. Captain Hugh Ashford stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw clenched, the expression of a man who hated waiting. Miss Beatrice Lorne sat stiffly in her chair, pearls trembling slightly with every breath. Silas Crowe looked ill, his documents spread before him like a courtroom exhibit. Mrs. Cora Harrowden stood as if she were still hostess of the evening, though now her hospitality had turned to venom. Her chin was lifted, eyes sharp. She refused to show fear because fear would mean weakness. And Elias Vale, the last guest, stood quietly near the bookshelf, not as a suspect, not as a guest, as if he were part of the house's structure, like a portrait, like a curse. Etienne Marceau watched him, and Marceau realized something essential. Vale did not behave like a man caught inside someone else's nightmare. He behaved like a man walking inside his own plan. Lionel coughed again, weakly, then whispered words that turned the room to ice. "He's back." Marceau leaned closer immediately, voice gentle. "Who is back, Mr. Harrowden?" Lionel's lips trembled. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "My brother," Lionel whispered. "He's back." Miss Beatrice gasped. "That's impossible," she whispered. Captain Ashford snapped, "Lionel, stop rambling." But Dr. Wren stiffened. Because doctors recognize when rambling is not madness. Sometimes it's truth struggling through poisoned fog. Marceau glanced toward Vale. Vale's face remained calm, but his eyes held. Something dangerous, not shock, not confusion, a quiet familiarity, as if Lionel's words had not surprised him but confirmed something. Inspector Holloway turned sharply. "You're saying your brother is alive?" Lionel swallowed with difficulty. "I saw him," Lionel whispered. Cora Harrowden laughed sharply. "Oh, Lionel," she said, "your poison has finally given you imagination." Lionel's head tilted weakly toward his wife. "You killed him," he whispered. "You killed him and you—" Cora's eyes flashed. "Do not," she hissed, "say stupid things in front of witnesses." That was not denial. That was control. Holloway snapped. "Madam, watch your tone." Cora turned to him slowly. "I will speak," she said coldly, "in whatever tone I like, Inspector." Then, with a slight smile, "This is my house," Captain Ashford muttered. "Not for long." Cora's eyes cut to him like a blade. "Oh, Captain," she whispered, "you should be careful. Men who act brave in front of policemen often become cowards in courtrooms." Ashford stiffened. Marceau's mind sharpened again. Cora had threatened Ashford subtly, meaning she knew something about him, meaning Ashford was not only a guest, he was a knot in this web. Holloway waved a constable toward Edith's side room. "Keep her guarded," he barked. "If she tries to speak to anyone, stop her." Then he turned back. "And now," Holloway said, "I want answers." He looked toward Lionel. "Who is your brother?" he demanded. Miss Lorne whispered, "His brother was Nathaniel Harrowden, died in a carriage wreck 5 years ago." Vale's lips curved faintly, as if the name pleased him. "Nathaniel," Vale murmured. "A good name." Holloway snapped. "And you, Vale, why do you look amused?" Vale turned to him calmly. "Because," he said, "Inspector, you're asking the wrong question." Holloway scowled. "Oh?" Vale nodded slightly. "Yes." He stepped forward and said softly, "You should be asking why Lionel Harrowden suddenly remembered his brother the moment the poison began to work." Silence. Dr. Wren's face tightened. Marceau's eyes narrowed. Captain Ashford's voice went hard. "What do you mean?" Vale replied smoothly. "I mean, memory is not random." He leaned slightly toward Lionel. "Tell them, Lionel," Vale whispered. "Tell them what you did." Lionel's eyes widened with fear. "Stop," Lionel whispered. Vale's voice remained gentle. "It's too late," he murmured. "Dawn is coming." Marceau stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Mr. Vale," he said, "your comfort in this chaos suggests you know more than you're admitting." Vale smiled at Marceau. "And your calm," Vale replied, "suggests you've already guessed it." Marceau held his gaze. "Then confirm it," Marceau said softly. "Who are you?" Vale paused. It was not hesitation. It was theater. Then he said, "I am Elias Vale." Marceau waited. Vale smiled slightly. "And once," Vale added quietly, "I was called Nathaniel." The room exploded into stunned silence. Miss Lorne's hand flew to her mouth. Silas Crowe whispered, "No, no, that's it." Captain Ashford stepped forward violently. "You're lying!" Vale remained calm. Then, with one slow movement, he removed his glove. On the side of his wrist was a faint scar, a jagged, thin white line like lightning. Lionel's eyes widened. "You!" Lionel whispered. Vale nodded. "Yes," Vale said softly. "Me." Holloway stepped forward, furious and confused. "If you're Nathaniel Harridan, you've been declared dead for 5 years," Vale nodded. "And that," he replied, "was the point." Dr. Wren whispered, horrified. "Carriage accidents don't fake themselves." Vale looked at the doctor. "No," he said, "people fake them." Cora Harridan's face turned pale for the first time, not fear, rage, because someone had stolen control from her. "You're alive," she whispered. Vale smiled faintly. "Yes." He turned toward her slowly. "And you," he added gently, "must be disappointed." Cora's expression twisted. "You ruined everything," she hissed. Vale's eyes hardened slightly. "No," he replied, "you ruined it 5 years ago." Captain Ashford stared at Vale like he'd seen a ghost. "You were dead," Ashford whispered. "We saw—" Vale cut him off with a calm glance. "You saw what you were told to see," he said. Marceau stepped forward again. "Why return now?" he asked. Vale's voice softened into something almost sad. "Because," Vale said quietly, "I found Lionel's new will." Crowe stiffened. Vale continued, "It removes Cora from power." Cora's jaw clenched. "It gives Edith money." Edith's sobbing could be heard faintly from the side room. "And it gives the estate," Vale said. "Softly, to the man Lionel murdered." Lionel shuddered violently. "I didn't," Lionel whispered. Vale leaned forward. "Yes, you did," Vale said calmly. Then he spoke like a radio narrator delivering the core of the story. 5 years ago, Lionel learned something about Cora, about her affair, about her secret arrangement with Captain Ashford, about the money moved quietly through Silas Crowe. Ashford's face went rigid. Crowe turned pale. Miss Lorne gasped. Cora's eyes became murderous. Vale continued softly. "Nathaniel found the proof. Nathaniel planned to expose it. Nathaniel planned to destroy the polite lies of this house." He paused. "And then Nathaniel fell from a carriage, conveniently, and died." Lionel whispered, "I didn't kill you, I didn't." Vale smiled coldly. "No," he said. Then he pointed toward Cora. "She did." Silence. Vale turned toward Lionel. "But you," Vale whispered, "covered it up." Lionel's eyes filled with tears. Vale's voice became softer again. "And so," Vale said, "you lived in this house for 5 years as a host." He tilted his head, "while your brother lived as a ghost." Captain Ashford suddenly shouted, "You're insane!" Vale looked at him with quiet disgust. "You helped her," Vale replied. Ashford snarled, "You have no proof." Vale turned toward Holloway. "Inspector," he said calmly, "your man searched my coat earlier." Holloway blinked. Yes? Vale nodded. In the inside pocket, Vale said, is a small leather envelope. A constable moved quickly, removed it, opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, a handwritten confession, and a very old locket, engraved with Harridan family crest. Lionel began sobbing weakly. Cora stared like a statue carved from hatred. Marceau's eyes sharpened. Then tonight, Marceau said softly, was not about theft. Vale smiled faintly. No, he replied. It was about returning. He stepped closer to Lionel. But you didn't want me back, Vale whispered. You wanted the estate safe. Lionel trembled. So you changed the will, Vale nodded. And that, Vale said, is why you were poisoned before dawn. Dr. Wren whispered. He was poisoned because he changed the will, not because of the will itself. Marceau nodded slowly. Yes, he said. And now the killer has a problem, Marceau added softly. Cora's eyes narrowed. What problem? She hissed. Marceau answered calmly. Lionel is dying. He looked at Vale. But Nathaniel has returned. Silence. Then Holloway barked. Enough. Both of you will come with me. Vale smiled. You can arrest me, he said calmly, but you cannot arrest Dawn. And outside, the horizon grew brighter. Chapter 6. A Secret in the Guest Book. Full. The guest book sat on the table like a polite weapon, a simple leather-bound book, pages filled with names, dates, little notes of gratitude, the kind of object that existed to make visitors feel welcome. But tonight, that guest book was no longer hospitality, it was a timeline. And timelines, Etienne Marceau knew, never lied, unless someone made them. Inspector Holloway slammed his palm on the guest book. This name, he barked, pointing at the ink, was written before Vale arrived. Explain that. No one spoke. Holloway turned toward Edith's side room. And don't tell me the girl wrote it. She was crying in the corridor. Cora Harridan's voice came sharply. It doesn't matter who wrote it, Holloway snapped. It matters a great deal. Cora turned slowly. Inspector, she said, you have no idea what truly matters in this house. Vale smiled faintly. She's right, he murmured. You don't. Marceau stepped forward. Then let us explain it simply, Marceau said. He picked up the guest book and flipped back several pages. There, a pattern. Names, arrival times, departures. But something was off. In the last month, several guests had arrived at unusual hours. Not 4:12 a.m. yet, but close. 1:30 a.m., 2:05 a.m., 3:47 a.m. Marceau traced the entries with his finger. Interesting, he murmured. Miss Beatrice whispered. What is that? Marceau looked at her gently. It is rehearsal, he said. Captain Ashford frowned. Rehearsal. Marceau nodded. This house has been training itself, he said softly. Training servants, training timing, training behavior. Holloway barked. For what? Vale answered calmly. For a clean night. Silence. Marceau turned to Vale. So, Marceau said, you plan to arrive at 4:12 a.m. Vale nodded. Yes, Marceau raised an eyebrow. And you wanted that time to appear written in the guest book before you arrived? Vale smiled faintly. Yes, Holloway roared. Why? Vale's eyes hardened slightly. Because, he replied, I needed everyone to understand that this night was already decided, he paused. And because a guest book entry is a form of official truth, Crow swallowed. Like a record, Marceau nodded. And records, Marceau said, control courts. Holloway's face darkened. So you created a record to support your story, he growled. Vale smiled slightly. My story is true, he replied. I merely made it undeniable. Cora snapped. He's manipulating everything like always. Vale turned slowly toward her. And you, he said softly, have been manipulating everything for 5 years. The room tightened. Marceau inspected the ink again. It was dry, yes, but it had a faint smear at the edge. Like someone had tried to wipe it quickly while still wet, then stopped. A nervous hand, someone writing under pressure. Marceau asked quietly, Who holds the guest book? A pause, then Miss Beatrice whispered, Edith. Usually Edith. She keeps it near the corridor. Table, Holloway snapped. But Edith was... Marceau lifted a finger. Not Edith, he said softly. He looked toward Silas Crow. Mr. Crow, Marceau asked, how often have you visited this house in the last month? Crow stiffened. I come for legal work. Marceau nodded. And you, Marceau said gently, have the habit of carrying a fountain pen. Crow blinked. It seemed ridiculous, until Marceau continued, your pen ink is slightly different from the house pen ink. The house ink is older, thicker. Yours is fresh, smooth. Crow's face turned pale. Marceau looked at the guest book again. This ink, Marceau said, is smooth. Silence. Crow whispered. That's insane. Marceau's tone remained calm. No, he said, it is forensic. Holloway stepped forward. You wrote the entry, he demanded. Crow stammered. No, I wouldn't. Vale cut in softly. He did. Holloway turned toward Vale. And you know, because, Vale replied calmly, because I instructed him. The room exploded. Ashford shouted, What? Cora hissed, You see? Vale continued with chilling calm. Yes, he said. I told Crow to write the entry. He paused. And I told Edith to pretend she didn't notice. Edith screamed from the side room, I didn't want to. Holloway roared, Silence her! The constable shut the door. Vale's eyes softened briefly, then hardened again. I needed the entry, Vale said, to mark the moment the house would change hands again. Miss Beatrice whispered, trembling, Change hands? Vale nodded. I came back to reclaim my life, he said softly, and to reclaim what was stolen. Marceau watched him carefully. This wasn't only revenge, it was strategy. A man who returned from the dead didn't return for hugs. He returned for war. Marceau asked, Then who poisoned Lionel? Silence. Vale looked toward Cora. Cora looked toward Edith's door. Ashford looked toward the window. Crow looked toward the floor. And Dr. Wren looked toward the soup tray again, like it was a corpse. Marceau's voice dropped. The poison, he said slowly, was placed in Lionel's body. He paused. But the plan was placed in this guest book. Holloway whispered. Meaning? Marceau turned the guest book toward them. This house, he said softly, was scheduled to collapse before dawn. He pointed at the time, 4:12 a.m. Vale's arrival was the signal, Marceau continued. And Lionel's poisoning, he looked at Cora, was the execution. Cora laughed coldly. You can accuse, she said, but you cannot prove. Vale smiled. Actually, he murmured, he can. Marceau turned sharply. Because, Vale added calmly, the fatal detail isn't the soup. He leaned forward slightly. It's the guest book. Silence. Vale continued. The guest book ink contains powdered residue. Dr. Wren stiffened. What residue? He whispered. Vale smiled. Foxglove, he said. The room froze. Marceau's eyes narrowed. Yes. That would explain why Edith's hands were damp, why the guest book was handled, why a perfect hostess wanted everyone focused on soup. Because the poison wasn't only in the bowl, it was in the ink. A touch poison, slow, elegant, and whoever wrote the entry poisoned themselves too, unless they wore gloves. Crow screamed suddenly. I didn't know! Holloway grabbed him. You wrote it with bare hands! Holloway roared. Crow sobbed. Vale told me it was just timing, just timing. Vale's smile turned colder. You should have worn gloves, he said. Marceau's voice was calm, terrifying. And that, he said softly, is why the last guest arrived before dawn. Because he didn't come only to witness. He came to ensure the right hands touched the ink, the right hands took the blame, and the right woman, Cora, kept her posture while others collapsed. Marceau looked at Holloway. Inspector, he said softly, this case has two poisons, Holloway whispered. Soup and ink, Marceau nodded. And one killer, he said. Holloway's eyes widened. You mean? Marceau's gaze moved to Vale. Vale did not flinch. Vale only smiled faintly, like dawn itself. Chapter 7. The missing hour. The most dangerous time in Harridan Manor was not 4:12 a.m. It was the hour before it, because a murder plan rarely begins with a doorbell. It begins with absence, with a moment missing from memory, a gap that nobody notices until it becomes the shape of guilt. Inspector Gareth Holloway stood near the tea table, guest book open, telegram slip spread beside it, his lantern casting harsh shadows across ink and paper. "The ink is poisoned," Holloway muttered. "The guest book is poisoned." Silas Crowe trembled so violently the constable holding him had to tighten his grip. "I didn't know," Crowe cried. "I swear I didn't know." Cora Harridan's voice cut through like a cold blade. "What a clever little story," she said. "Poison ink? Is this a detective novel now?" Elias Vale smiled faintly. "This house has always been a novel," he replied. "Only now we've reached the final chapters." Captain Hugh Ashford snapped. "Shut up!" Vale's eyes moved to Ashford slowly. "And that, Captain," Vale said softly, "is why I enjoy dawn." Ashford's jaw clenched. "Why?" Vale replied quietly. "Because men like you are braver in the dark." Marceau's calm voice entered. "We are wasting time," he said. Holloway turned sharply. "Wasting? Lionel is dying." Marceau nodded. "Yes," he said, "which is why we must focus on the one detail that can save him." He stepped closer to Lionel. Lionel's head had fallen slightly to one side. His lips were pale now. His breathing came in short, uneven waves. "Dr. Malcolm," Wren whispered, "his heart rhythm is failing. We need him to hospital now." Marceau's eyes stayed calm. "Doctor," he asked gently, "if this is foxglove, what is the antidote?" Dr. Wren frowned. "There's no direct antidote. We can support him, stabilize. We can—" Marceau nodded. "So time is the antidote," Marceau said. He turned back to the room. "Then time," he continued calmly, "is also the killer's weapon." Vale's smile tightened a fraction. Marceau looked at Vale directly. "Mr. Vale," he said softly, "the missing hour." Silence. Vale didn't move. Marceau continued. "You arrived at 4:12 a.m. Your entry was written before you arrived. Lionel's poisoning began before you arrived." He paused. "Which means something happened between 3:10 a.m. and 4:10 a.m. The missing hour." The room stiffened. Holloway barked. "Everyone tell me where you were during that hour." Cora laughed quietly. "You expect honesty," she mocked. Holloway snapped. "I expect fear." And fear came, because when you start asking about an hour, no one is prepared for liars' collapse. The missing hour interviews Miss Beatrice Lorne. Beatrice spoke first, voice trembling but polished. "I was in the powder room," she said. "My nerves. This night has been dreadful," Ashford scoffed. "An hour in the powder room?" Beatrice's cheeks flushed. I took medicine." Dr. Wren glanced at her briefly. "What kind?" he asked. Beatrice hesitated. "Sleeping drops," she whispered. Marceau nodded slightly, a calm note in his mind. Sleeping drops can be alibi or excuse. Captain Hugh Ashford. Ashford's eyes were hard. "I was outside," he said, "in the corridor near the front entrance." Holloway barked. "Why?" Ashford snapped. "Because I wanted to leave. Lionel kept locking us in." Marceau asked softly, "Did you go outside that house?" Ashford hesitated. Then, "No?" Marceau's eyes narrowed. "No man stands by a door for an hour unless he expects it to open." Silas Crowe cried openly. "I was in the study," he said. "I was preparing papers. Lionel asked me to—" Holloway roared. "Lionel asked you at 3 a.m. Crowe swallowed. "Earlier," he corrected weakly. "I only finished at 3. Marceau noticed his correction. Alibis don't change unless memory is forced, or unless lies are adjusted. Mrs. Cora Harridan. Cora didn't hesitate. "I was here," she said. "In the sitting room," Holloway snapped. "With who?" Cora replied smoothly. "With everyone." But that was false. Even Marceau knew it. Because the sitting room had been quiet, yes, yet within that missing hour, someone had moved. The soup tray hadn't moved itself, the guest book hadn't poisoned itself, the telegram hadn't placed itself, and Lionel hadn't poisoned himself. Elias Vale. Finally Holloway turned to Vale. "And you!" Holloway growled. "Where were you in that hour?" Vale smiled softly. "Outside," he said. Ashford snapped. "Liar! You weren't here!" Vale nodded politely. "Exactly," he said. He paused. "I was outside," Holloway snarled. "Outside where?" Vale's smile widened faintly. "In the only place a dead man can wait," he said. "The shadows." The missing hour reveals itself. Marceau stepped toward the grandfather clock. It was old, tall, polished wood, like Harridan Manor itself. And it was slightly wrong. Marceau leaned closer. The clock's pendulum swung. But the tick wasn't steady. Sometimes it skipped, a tiny irregularity. Marceau reached behind the clock case. His fingers touched something, a small lever, a hidden lever. He pressed it, a faint click, a narrow compartment opened inside the base. Everyone froze. Captain Ashford whispered, "What is that?" Marceau pulled something out, a small metal tin, inside powdered residue. Dr. Wren inhaled sharply. "Foxglove powder," he whispered. Holloway barked. "So the poison was hidden here?" Marceau nodded calmly. "And look," he said softly. He held up the tin. There was a fingerprint mark in the powder. Not Cora's, not Crow's, not Lionel's. A smaller print, a nervous print, Edith's. Holloway's eyes widened. "So Edith took poison from here," Cora hissed. "She's a liar and a fool." Vale cut in softly. "No," he said. He looked toward Cora. "She's a pawn," he murmured. Silence tightened. Marceau turned toward Holloway. "Inspector," he said calmly, "Edith was instructed." Holloway nodded slowly. "By Cora." Marceau paused. "Perhaps," he said softly. Then he added, "But Edith's fingerprints only prove she touched it." He turned his gaze to Vale. "They do not prove who placed it." A chill moved through the room. Vale smiled faintly. "You're beginning to hear the music," Vale whispered. Marceau remained calm. He pointed to the clock. "This clock hides poison," he said, "which means the poison was meant to be used at a scheduled time." He paused. "Someone planned the missing hour." Outside, the horizon brightened more. Inside, the truth grew darker. Chapter 8. The Fatal Proof in Plain Sight Full. By 4:40 a.m., Harridan Manor smelled different. Not tea, not polish. It smelled like cold fear. The constables had sealed doors. The servants waited in the corridor, whispering. Rainwater dripped from boots onto carpets too expensive for truth. Lionel Harridan's condition was worsening. Dr. Wren had managed to stabilize him temporarily, but his face was strained. "We must move him," he insisted. "Now!" Holloway nodded. "Carriage!" he barked. "Immediately!" Then Holloway turned, back to the room. "One of you tried to kill him," he growled. Cora sat now, stiff, proud, dangerous. Vale stood near the bookshelf, silent. Ashford hovered like a wolf ready to bite. Beatrice trembled quietly. Crow looked like a man seeing prison bars. Marceau moved through the room calmly, not searching wildly, but listening to objects, because objects always tell. He picked up the telegram slip again. "Arriving 4:12 a.m. Stop last guest before dawn. Stop, keep them inside. Stop." He studied it slowly. Then he asked softly, "Inspector Holloway, who received this telegram?" Holloway frowned. "Edith," he said. "She said she found it." Marceau nodded gently. "And where is the telegram envelope?" Silence. No one answered. Marceau's eyes sharpened. "Telegrams come in envelopes," he said calmly. "Paper leaves evidence." Crow swallowed. "Maybe it was thrown away." Marceau smiled faintly. "No," he replied. "Not in this house. Harridan Manor doesn't. Throw away paper, it files it." He turned and walked toward the writing desk near the window, where Lionel's stationery lay. On the desk were several items: a blotting pad, a letter opener, sealing wax, an ink bottle, and a brass stamp. Marceau lifted the blotting pad. Under it, a torn telegram envelope. Holloway leaned in. "Damn!" Marceau pointed to the corner, a tiny smear of dark ink, not telegram ink, pen ink, and next to it a faint powder trace. Dr. Wren stiffened. "Foxglove residue," he whispered. Holloway's voice rose. "Meaning the envelope was handled after poison." Marceau nodded. "Yes," he said. Then he looked toward Crow. "Mr. Crow," he asked softly, "did you file the envelope?" Crow shook his head violently. "No, no." Marceau's gaze moved toward Cora. "Madam," he asked gently. Cora's eyes narrowed. "You're accusing me because I am organized," she hissed. Marceau replied calmly. "No." He paused. "I am accusing you because you are precise." That word hit. Precise. Cora's expression tightened. Vale smiled faintly. And Marceau realized this was the moment the trap snapped. Because the fatal proof wasn't hidden. It had always been in plain sight, on the writing desk, in the ink, in the paper trail. The paper trail that kills Marceau opened the ink bottle. He didn't smell it dramatically. He didn't sip it like foolish theater. He simply tilted it, letting the light catch the liquid. Something shimmered strangely. A faint grain in the ink. Dr. Wren leaned closer. "That ink isn't pure," he whispered. Holloway barked. "What is it?" Marceau answered softly. Suspension." He held the bottle up. Powder mixed into ink. The room went cold. Holloway's voice dropped. "So the guest book ink?" Marceau nodded. "Yes," he said. "Touch poison." Silas Crow began sobbing again. "I didn't know," he cried. "I didn't know he would do that!" Holloway spun to Vale. "You!" Holloway roared. "You poisoned the ink!" Vale didn't flinch. He only replied softly. "I merely provided a stage." Holloway stepped forward. "You're under arrest." Vale smiled faintly. "Inspector," he said calmly, "you still don't understand." Holloway snarled. "Then explain." Vale's voice became softer. "Cora poisoned Lionel," Vale said. Cora hissed. "Liar," Vale continued without emotion. "Edith carried it," he said. Edith's sobbing sounded from behind the side door. Vale's eyes moved to Ashford. "And Captain Ashford," Vale murmured. Ashford stiffened. "Ensured everyone stayed in the house long enough." Captain Ashford exploded. "You're insane!" Marceau's voice cut through softly. "No," Marceau said. He looked at Ashford. "Captain," he asked gently, "why did you stand near the door during the missing hour?" Ashford's face went red. "I wanted to leave," Marceau nodded calmly. "Then why didn't you?" he asked. Ashford froze, because the answer was simple. He didn't leave because he wasn't allowed, or because he didn't want to, and if he didn't want to, he was part of it. "And the fatal proof," Holloway demanded. "Where is the proof?" Marceau lifted the brass seal stamp from the desk. He turned it. Underneath the handle, a faint powder residue. "Foxglove." Marceau spoke calmly, like the final narration before the reveal. "The person who mixed poison into ink used this stamp," he said, "to seal telegrams, to seal letters, to handle paper without touching poison." He looked at Cora. "You used it," Marceau said softly. Cora's face turned pale, just briefly. Then she laughed sharply. "A stamp?" she mocked. "Your proof is a stamp." Marceau nodded. "Yes," he replied, "because the stamp is the only object in this room designed for one purpose." He paused. "To leave a mark without leaving fingerprints." Silence. Dr. Wren whispered, "My God!" Holloway stepped toward Cora, and for the first time, Cora looked genuinely frightened. Not of prison, of losing control. She whispered, "Lionel deserved it." Ashford barked, "Cora!" Cora snapped at him, eyes blazing. "You promised me he'd never change the will." Ashford froze. Holloway's eyes widened. "Promised?" he repeated slowly. Vale's smile returned, and now Marceau understood the final shape. This wasn't just revenge. This was power. Chapter 9, The Radio-Style Reveal. At 4:58 a.m., Harridan Manor no longer felt like a house. It felt like a stage. The lamps still glowed softly. The fireplace still breathed warmth. The velvet curtains still hid the garden from sight, but the people were no longer guests, they were suspects. Inspector Gareth Holloway stood at the center of the sitting room like a man, holding a room together with pure force. Two constables guarded the corridor door. Another stood near the writing desk where the poisoned ink bottle and seal stamp lay like silent witnesses. Lionel Harridan, still alive, barely, had been moved onto the chaise lounge near the fire. Dr. Malcolm Wren remained beside him, hands steady, expression fierce. It was the expression of a doctor refusing to allow death to win quietly. Mrs. Cora Harridan sat upright, her face pale now, not frightened but furious. Rage in silk clothing, Captain Hugh Ashford paced like a trapped wolf. Silas Crowe had collapsed into a chair, his briefcase open, papers scattered like ruined prayers. Miss Beatrice Lorne sat stiffly, eyes haunted. Edith Vale remained locked in the side room with a guard, her quiet sobbing faintly audible through the door, and Elias Vale stood near the bookshelf, his posture relaxed, too relaxed, as if he already knew where this story would end. Etienne Marceau stepped forward and spoke gently, calm enough that even the fire seemed to listen. "Inspector," he said, "it is time." Holloway looked at him grimly. "Time for what?" Marceau nodded toward the chairs. "To gather everyone," he replied, and to tell the truth plainly. Holloway's jaw clenched. He understood what Marceau meant. It was the oldest tradition in mystery, all faces in one room, all lies forced into the light, and one calm voice that untangles the thread. Holloway barked to the constables, "Bring Edith in!" A moment later, the side-room door opened. Edith Vale entered slowly, her face swollen from tears, hands clasped at her chest. She looked like someone who had been used up by more powerful people. She sat quietly near the edge of the group, barely lifting her eyes. Marceau waited until the last chair stopped scraping. Then he began, slowly, carefully, like a radio narrator, guiding listeners through the final chapter. "My friends," Marceau said, softly, "this house is built on secrets." Cora scoffed. "Spare us the poetry." Marceau glanced at her with gentle calm. "Madame," he replied, "your impatience is understandable. You prefer control." Cora's eyes burned. Marceau continued, unbothered. "Tonight began with a gathering," he said. "A calm gathering nearly over, a host who refused to let his guests leave." Captain Ashford snapped. "Because he was paranoid." Marceau nodded. "Yes, paranoid." He paused, but not without reason. He turned to Lionel Harridan. "Lionel had discovered the truth about his brother's death," Marceau said. Lionel's eyes fluttered weakly. Vale's smile tightened. Marceau spoke clearly now, slowly. 5 years ago, Nathaniel Harridan died in a carriage accident." Miss Beatrice whispered, trembling. "We all believed it." Marceau nodded. "Yes, because the house made sure you believed it." Then Marceau turned slightly toward Vale. "But, Nathaniel did not die," Marceau said. Vale did not move. He only watched. Marceau continued. "He survived, disappeared, and returned tonight as Elias Vale, the last guest before dawn." Inspector Holloway exhaled sharply. "Yes," he said. "That part we now understand." Marceau raised a finger. "But here is what you do not yet understand." The room tightened. Marceau's tone became more precise, still calm. "Nathaniel did not return for revenge." Cora's mouth curled. "Oh, really?" Marceau nodded. "No," he said. "Nathaniel returned for ownership." Silence. Crowe whispered, "Ownership of the estate." Marceau's eyes shifted to Crowe. "And of the truth," he added. Vale smiled faintly, as if amused by how close Marceau was getting. Marceau continued, "When Lionel changed his will, he threatened the balance of power in this house." He pointed toward the documents on the floor. "The new will was meant to punish those who betrayed him." Marceau said, "To strip Cora of influence, to expose Crowe's quiet involvement, to force Ashford out of Lionel's life." Ashford's face turned red. "Lies!" Marceau looked at him calmly. "No, Captain," he said. "Facts." Ashford hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than denial. Marceau continued. "Cora, fearing her loss of power, needed one thing." He paused. Lionel dead before the will could be properly witnessed. Holloway nodded grimly. So she planned murder? Cora snapped. You can't prove it? Marceau smiled faintly. Oh, he said gently, but we can. He walked to the writing desk and lifted the seal stamp. This, he said, holding it up, is how Cora avoided fingerprints while handling poison. Then he lifted the ink bottle. And this is how she avoided blame, he continued, by making poison seem like a complex conspiracy. Cora laughed sharply. Absurd? Marceau placed the objects down gently. Then he turned and asked the question that made the entire room hold its breath. Who in this house benefits when everyone suspects Vale? Silence. Then Dr. Wren whispered, Cora. Marceau nodded. Yes, he said softly. Cora benefits. Cora's eyes narrowed. Marceau continued. Cora used Edith, he said. Edith flinched violently. I didn't want to. Marceau looked at her kindly. I know, he said. Then he turned to Holloway. Edith served the soup, Marceau said, but she did not create the plan. She only obeyed because she was promised protection. Edith whispered. She said she'd save me, Cora hissed. You stupid girl, Holloway roared. Silence! Cora snapped her mouth shut, eyes blazing. Now Marceau shifted. He looked toward Vale. But Cora did not create the whole plan either, Marceau said softly. The room froze. Holloway stared. What? Marceau nodded toward the guest book. The guest book entry was written in advance, he said. The telegram was sent. The timing was exact. The trap required precision. He turned to Vale. That precision belongs to you. Silence thickened. Vale smiled slightly. Marceau continued calmly. Vale returned to Harridan Manor not to stop a murder, no, but to guide it. Ashford shouted. I told you! Marceau lifted a hand. Captain, he said softly, you are angry because you fear you will be blamed. Sit with your fear. Ashford froze. Marceau returned to Vale. Vale arranged his arrival at 4:12 a.m. to create a record, Marceau said. A record that would be used in court. A record designed to make this night unavoidably historic. Holloway growled. So Vale's the mastermind? Marceau shook his head gently. No, he replied. The room tightened even more. Tonight, Marceau said softly, has two masterminds. He looked at Cora. One planned death. Then he looked at Vale. The other planned ownership. Vale's eyes sharpened. Marceau continued. And this is the missing hour, 3:10 to 4:10. He pointed at the grandfather clock. The poison was hidden inside the clock base, Marceau said. A place only someone who knew the house intimately would choose. Cora's eyes narrowed. Vale's expression remained calm. Marceau then said the sentence that landed like a bullet. The person who placed the poison in the clock, he paused, was not Edith. Edith gasped. Holloway's eyes widened. Then who? Marceau turned his head toward the only person in the room who looked unsurprised, Elias Vale. Vale's faint smile returned. I had to ensure the poison was available, Vale said softly. The room erupted. Cora shouted, What? Ashford growled. You devil! Crow sobbed. You used us all. Vale stayed calm. Yes, he said. Then he added chillingly, because justice does not arrive on its own. Someone must carry it. Marceau nodded slightly. And Vale, Marceau continued, did not poison Lionel directly, but he provided the weapon, knowing Cora would use it. Vale smiled faintly. I knew Cora's nature, Vale said. She cannot resist power. Cora screamed. You set me up, Vale replied softly. You walked into it willingly. Silence. Then Lionel moved weakly on the chaise lounge. His voice was faint, but it cut like glass. He's right. Everyone froze. Lionel's eyes were wet. I created her, Lionel whispered. I allowed her. He coughed. Dr. Wren steadied him. Lionel continued weakly. I buried Nathaniel's truth. He looked at Vale. And that's why he returned as a ghost. Vale's eyes softened for a fraction, then hardened again. Marceau stepped forward. Inspector, he said calmly, there is your truth. He pointed to Cora. She attempted murder, then to Vale, and he orchestrated the trap. Holloway's face turned dark. You both will. Answer for this, he growled. Vale smiled faintly. Of course, he said, but at least the story will finally be clean. Chapter 10, The Last Guest, explained. Dawn arrived at 5:24 a.m. Not like a celebration, like a verdict. The grey light slipped into Harridan Manor slowly, touching curtains, carpets, faces, and making everything look more honest than it wanted to be. In daylight, luxury looked less powerful. In daylight, lies looked tired. Inspector Holloway ordered arrests. 2 constables stepped toward Cora Harridan first. Cora did not scream. She did not beg. She only straightened her shoulders like a queen refusing to bow. "This house was mine," she whispered. Holloway snapped, "Not anymore." As they took her wrists, Cora finally turned her head toward Lionel. Her voice became soft, almost affectionate. "You weak man," she whispered. "You should have died years ago." Lionel's eyes filled with tears, not from love, from regret. Then the constables turned toward Vale. Holloway said, "Elias Vale, or Nathaniel Harridan, you're under arrest for conspiracy and manipulation of evidence." Vale nodded calmly. "Very well," he replied. He did not resist. Because he had never been fighting the law, he had been fighting the history of the house. As Vale was led away, he turned his head toward Marceau. "Detective," he said softly, "you understand me." Marceau replied calmly, "I understand you." Vale smiled faintly. "Then you know," Vale whispered. "I did not return to live here." Marceau's eyes narrowed. "No?" Vale's voice dropped. "I returned," he said, "to bury the house properly." And then he was gone down the corridor. Edith, shaking and broken, collapsed into a chair. "I didn't want any of this," she whispered. Dr. Wren sat beside her quietly. "You still have a conscience," he said. "That's why you're alive." Edith sobbed. Marceau turned toward Crow. "Mr. Crow," Marceau asked softly, "how long have you been protecting this family's lies?" Crow whispered, "Too long." Marceau nodded. "That is the true poison," he said. He turned toward Captain Ashford. "And you, Captain," Marceau said gently, "you stood at the door to keep everyone inside." Ashford snapped. "I didn't know about the poison." Marceau's eyes stayed calm. "No," he said, "but you did know about the affair." Ashford froze. Marceau continued. "You thought loyalty would protect you." He paused. "It never does." Ashford's shoulders sagged. Holloway spoke harshly. "You'll answer later." Captain Ashford didn't fight any more. He only looked tired. Miss Beatrice Lorne whispered, "So what happens now?" Marceau looked at her gently. "Now," he said, "Harridan Manor wakes up." He gestured toward the window, where morning light now filled the room completely. "And it must live with itself." Lionel's final confession. Lionel's breathing had stabilized slightly. Dr. Wren checked him again. "He may survive," Wren whispered, "if the hospital is quick." Lionel's eyes opened and found Marceau. "Detective," Lionel whispered weakly, "I must tell you something." Marceau leaned closer. "Yes," he said softly. Lionel swallowed hard. "My brother," Lionel whispered, "did not die by accident." Marceau nodded. "I know," he said. Lionel's voice trembled. "I covered it up," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting the family." He coughed. Dr. Wren steadied him. Lionel continued. "But I was protecting evil." His eyes filled with tears. "And now," Lionel whispered, "the house has eaten itself." Marceau nodded gently. "That is what houses built on lies always do," he said. Lionel whispered, "Do you think Nathaniel is evil?" Marceau paused, then answered honestly, "I think Nathaniel returned wounded." Lionel closed his eyes. "And wounded men," Marceau added softly, "do not always know the difference between justice and punishment." Lionel's lips trembled. "That's my fault," Lionel whispered. Marceau nodded. "Yes," he said. A silence followed, deep, heavy, honest. Then Lionel whispered, "He was the last guest." Marceau replied softly, "Yes." He paused, "And the last guest was the last warning." Epilogue, vintage radio outro style. 3 months later, Harridan Manor was sold. The carpets were removed, the portraits were taken down, The furniture was auctioned to strangers who knew nothing of the night the house stayed awake. Cora Harridan was sentenced. Silas Crowe lost his license. Captain Ashford lost his pride. Edith Vale left the town entirely, haunted but free. Lionel Harridan survived, but never hosted again. And Nathaniel Harridan? He disappeared again. Not dead, not alive in the social world, a shadow, a story whispered in drawing rooms. He came back once before dawn, and the manor never recovered. And so, dear friends, the calm evening ended not with tea, but with truth. The last guest before dawn was not merely a visitor, he was the past, returning to collect its debt. If you enjoyed this vintage mystery radio drama, make sure to subscribe to Hercule Mysteries for more calm, classic whodunits, and tell me in the comments, what was the fatal detail for you, the poisoned ink, or the time 4:12 a.m.? Until next time, sleep peacefully. And remember, the quietest guest is often the most dangerous.